There comes a point in every empath's life when exhaustion speaks louder than words. For years, you carried burdens that were never yours to carry. You listened when no one listened to you. You stayed when others walked away. You gave chances, understanding, forgiveness, and pieces of your heart to people who often took your kindness for granted. You believed that if you loved harder, cared deeper, and sacrificed more, things would eventually change. But instead of finding peace, you found yourself drained, disappointed, and emotionally exhausted. Then something shifts, not because you become cold, not because you stop caring, but because you finally realize that constantly absorbing the emotions, problems, and negativity of others is not a sign of strength. It is a path to self-destruction. The moment an empath enters the silent season, they begin to understand a truth that changes everything. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It is necessary. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means surrender. They think it means weakness, fear, or defeat. But real silence is none of those things. Real silence is protection. It is the moment you stop wasting your energy trying to convince people of your worth. It is the moment you stop explaining yourself to those who have already chosen not to understand you. It is the moment you stop fighting battles that were never meant to be yours. You no longer react to every criticism. You no longer rush to defend your intentions. You no longer chase validation from people who only notice your value when you are giving them something. Instead, you become selective with your attention because you finally understand that attention is one of the most valuable forms of energy you possess. The silent season is not about shutting the world out. It is about creating a safe place within yourself, a place where other people's opinions cannot control your emotions, a place where manipulation loses its power, a place where guilt no longer forces you to betray your own needs. And as this silence grows, something remarkable happens. The chaos that once disturbed your peace begins to lose its influence. The drama that once demanded your reaction receives none. The people who once had access to your emotions can no longer reach the parts of you that are healing. You discover that not every battle deserves your attention, not every argument deserves your voice, and not every person deserves unlimited access to your heart. Because true power begins the moment an empath learns that silence is not weakness. It is sacred protection. One of the hardest lessons an empath will ever learn is that not everyone values what they freely give. For so much of your life, you believed that love meant sacrifice. You believed that being a good person meant always being available, always understanding, always forgiving, and always putting the needs of others before your own. You became the person everyone could call when they were struggling. You became the shoulder to cry on, the listener, the helper, the fixer, and the peacemaker. And at first, it felt meaningful, it felt like purpose, but over time, something began to happen. You noticed that while you were constantly showing up for others, very few people showed up for you. You noticed that some people only called when they needed something. Some only remembered your value when they needed your support. Some happily accepted your kindness, but never thought about how much it was costing you. The painful truth is that many empaths spend years pouring their energy into empty cups. They keep giving to people who have no intention of giving back. They keep investing in relationships that are built entirely on their generosity. They keep hoping that one day their loyalty will be appreciated. Their sacrifices will be recognized, and their love will finally be returned with the same sincerity. But the silent season changes everything. It is during this season that you begin to see people clearly. Not through the lens of hope, but through the lens of truth. You stop focusing on potential and start paying attention to patterns. You stop listening to promises and start observing actions. You stop asking how much you can give and start asking whether the relationship is healthy in the first place. This awareness can be painful because it forces you to accept realities you once avoided. It forces you to acknowledge that some people loved your presence but never truly valued you. They loved your support, your patience, your forgiveness, and your generosity. But they never learned how to reciprocate those gifts, and that realization changes the way you move through the world. You no longer feel guilty for stepping back. You no longer feel responsible for carrying everyone else's emotional weight. You no longer believe that your worth is measured by how much you sacrifice for others. Instead, you begin saving your energy for people who genuinely respect it. Because your kindness was never meant to be an endless supply for those who take without gratitude. Your compassion was never meant to become a tool for others to use. Your kindness is a gift, not an obligation. And the moment you understand that, you stop pouring into empty cups and start filling your own. One of the deepest wounds an empath carries is not the pain itself. It is the unanswered questions left behind by the pain. You replay conversations in your mind. You revisit moments that changed everything. You search for explanations, for reasons, for understanding. You wonder why someone you love could hurt you. You wonder why your loyalty was met with betrayal, why your kindness was met with indifference, or why people who promised to stay became the very ones who walked away. Because empaths naturally seek understanding, they often spend years chasing closure. They believe that healing will finally begin when they receive the apology, when the truth comes out, when the other person finally admits what they did, when someone acknowledges the damage they caused. But the silent season introduces a difficult truth that many people spend a lifetime avoiding. Not everyone will give you closure. Some people will never apologize. Some people will never understand the pain they caused. Some people will rewrite the story to protect themselves. Some will move on as if nothing happened. And some will leave your life carrying answers that you may never receive. For a long time, this reality feels unbearable. It feels unfair. Because part of you believes that one conversation, one explanation, or one apology will finally set your heart free. But what if freedom was never waiting on them? What if healing was never dependent on another person's awareness? The silent season begins when you stop standing at a closed door waiting for someone else to open it. It begins when you realize that every day spent chasing closure is another day spent handing your power to the very people who hurt you. Gradually, you start releasing the need for answers, not because the pain didn't matter, but because your peace matters more. You stop asking why they did it and start asking how you can move forward. You stop focusing on what they owe you and start focusing on what you owe yourself. And that shift changes everything. The wound that once controlled your thoughts begins to lose its grip. The memories that once kept you awake no longer have the same power. The disappointment remains part of your story, but it no longer defines your future. You begin to understand that acceptance is not approval. Acceptance does not mean what happened was right. It simply means you are no longer willing to let the past hold your future hostage. The greatest closure often arrives when you stop seeking it from others and create it within yourself. Because true healing begins the moment you accept that your peace does not require anyone else's permission. For many empaths, being alone has always felt uncomfortable. Not because they dislike themselves, but because they have spent so much of their lives connected to other people's emotions that silence feels unfamiliar. They become accustomed to helping, supporting, fixing, and carrying. Their sense of purpose becomes tied to being needed. So when the noise disappears and the crowd grows quiet, it can feel like something is missing. But the silent season teaches a powerful lesson. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. At first, solitude may feel strange. The phone stops ringing as often. The constant demands begin to fade. The people who once relied on your endless availability slowly drift away when they realize you are no longer sacrificing yourself to keep everyone comfortable. For a moment, this can feel painful. You may wonder if you've become disconnected. You may question whether you are losing relationships or losing your place in the lives of others. But then something remarkable begins to happen. Without all the noise, you finally hear yourself. For years, you knew everyone else's dreams, fears, struggles, and expectations. You knew what everyone needed from you, but somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask yourself what you needed. You forgot to listen to your own voice, because the voices around you were always louder. Solitude changes that. In the quiet, you begin reconnecting with the person you were before the world told you who you had to be. You rediscover passions that were neglected. You remember dreams that were placed on hold. You start noticing what genuinely brings you peace instead of constantly focusing on what brings comfort to others. The silent season becomes a place of rebuilding, a place where your identity is no longer dependent on approval, attention, or validation. Day by day, you become more comfortable with your own company. You stop fearing empty rooms because those empty rooms become the birthplace of your transformation. While others may see isolation, you begin to see preparation, because every strong foundation is built away from the spotlight. Every meaningful transformation happens before the world notices. The strongest version of yourself is not created in chaos. It is created in moments of reflection, self-discovery, and intentional solitude. And as you spend more time with yourself, your confidence begins to grow from a deeper place. Not from praise, not from recognition, not from being needed, but from truly knowing who you are. That is when solitude stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like a privilege. Because the empath who learns to enjoy their own company discovers a strength that no rejection, betrayal, or disappointment can ever take away. Boundaries are often the most misunderstood form of love, especially for empaths. For so long, you may have believed that saying no makes you selfish, that protecting your time makes you rude, that choosing yourself makes you less caring. So you kept saying yes when you were already exhausted. You kept staying in conversations that drained you. You kept tolerating behavior that slowly broke your peace, all because you didn't want to disappoint anyone. But the silence season changes that belief at its core. It teaches you that boundaries are not walls to push people away. They are filters that protect your energy from being misused. Without boundaries, even the kindest heart becomes a place where others can overstay, overtake, and overstep. And for empaths, this becomes especially dangerous because their natural instinct is to understand, to forgive, to give another chance, even when they are the ones being hurt. At some point, you begin to realize that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your emotions. Not every problem is yours to fix. Not every request requires your sacrifice. And not every relationship deserves your constant availability. This realization does not make you cold. It makes you aware. You start noticing how peace feels when you stop over-explaining yourself. You notice how calm life becomes when you stop rushing to rescue people from the consequences of their own actions. You begin to understand that your energy is not infinite, and every time you give it away without protection, you are slowly abandoning yourself. Setting boundaries does not happen loudly. It happens quietly in small decisions. Not answering every call immediately. Not engaging in every emotional crisis. Not agreeing just to avoid conflict. Not allowing guilt to dictate your choices. And slowly, these small decisions begin to reshape your entire emotional world. At first, some people may resist your boundaries. They may call you distant or different. But what they are really reacting to is the version of you they can no longer access without respect. And that discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. Because healthy relationships survive boundaries. Only unhealthy patterns collapse under them. As you continue in the silence season, you realize something powerful. Boundaries don't reduce. They refine it. They show you who truly respects you and who only benefited from your lack of limits. And in that clarity, you begin to reclaim your time, your energy, and your peace without apology. And once an empath learns to protect their energy without guilt, they finally step into a version of themselves that cannot be drained or diminished again. You become untouchable when your peace starts coming from within, not from people, not from approval, and not from circumstances. For most of your life as an empath, your emotional stability was tied to the outside world. If people were kind, you felt safe. If they were distant, you felt anxious. If they were upset, you felt responsible. Your mood often depended on how others treated you, and your energy shifted based on the emotional atmosphere around you. But the silence season changes that entire foundation. It slowly teaches you that external chaos does not have to become internal chaos. Just because someone is angry does not mean you must absorb that anger. Just because someone is disappointed does not mean you must carry their emotions. Just because life becomes unpredictable does not mean your inner world has to collapse with it. You begin to realize that peace is not something you find in other people. It is something you build within yourself. At first, this shift feels unnatural. You are so used to reacting, fixing, and emotionally engaging with everything around you that staying calm feels like doing nothing. But over time, you learn that not reacting is actually a form of strength. Not engaging in negativity is a form of discipline. Not allowing external noise to enter your mind is a form of protection. Slowly, your emotional center moves inward. Criticism no longer shakes your identity. Rejection no longer defines your worth. Betrayal no longer destroys your entire emotional state. These experiences still exist, but they no longer control you. They pass through your life without becoming permanent storms inside your mind. And that is where true emotional freedom begins. You stop seeking validation from people who are inconsistent with your value. You stop measuring your worth based on who stays and who leaves. You stop allowing temporary situations to define your permanent identity. Instead, you build a steady inner space where your confidence is not easily disturbed. This is what it means to become untouchable. Not because life stops hurting you, but because nothing outside of you can permanently control you anymore. Your happiness becomes self-generated. Your stability becomes self-protected. Your peace becomes self-owned. And once that happens, manipulation loses its power, negativity loses its impact, and emotional chaos loses its control over you. Because when an empath finally learns to anchor their peace within themselves, they no longer break with the world, they rise above it.